history nerds and historians. My name is Krystina and this is Effed Up Cryptozoology. This is where we talk about a little tidbit about a cryptid that's super fucked up. So far we've talked about two of the bigger names in the cryptid world, the North American Sasquatch and the Yeti of Eastern Asia. But when I was going through and researching the Sasquatch and the Yeti, there were so many other Bigfoot, Bigfeet stories that I was encountering. Pretty much every continent has at least one story, except for potentially Antarctica, but that is also like the final frontier on Earth, so who knows what's there. So today I kind of want to talk about some of those, but before we do that, hey, I have a Patreon. It would be super cool if you could join it. Once I get enough people, I'd love to do like live streams or like a weekly online trivia or something like that. So if you can, that would be super cool fun times. I'm really bad about this, but everyone says that I should start promoting it more. So anyway, without further ado, sit back, relax, and practice your oh good god, what the fuck faces. So like we talked about last time, the Yeti has what are believed to be three different species, one of which resembles a Bigfoot-like creature, but that is not the only Bigfoot-like cryptid that calls Asia home. So the first one that I came across was the Yeren, which is basically translates to wild man in Chinese. It's found in folklore from central and southern China. It's said to be bipedal, over 6 feet tall with reddish brown hair. It has big footprints that are 14 to 16 inches in length. But just like the skunk ape that we talked about, there seems to be two different kinds of sightings and stories. One that is humanoid and one that is more ape-like. The one that's ape-like is said to go on all fours with longer reddish hair, and some people think that it is a species of ape, like a mainland orangutan, that has yet to be discovered. Sightings of these date back to 300 BCE. They were typically described as quite aggressive and strong and were really only seen when they descended from the mountains to raid villages and kidnap women. So the stories of the North American Bigfoot started circulating in the 1950s and 60s, and the stories of the Yeti from a little earlier in the 20th century started this like Yeren fever in China. The Maoist government was really trying to suppress it, but there were a lot of people who were looking into it, including the Chinese Academy of Sciences. They interviewed people and looked into the evidence like hair samples and footprints, but by the 1980s the Yeren fever had broke, but there were some people who were interested in potentially finding the Yeren, and it's very popular in art surrounding nature, deforestation awareness, and an overall cultural revolution in China. Japan also has a Bigfoot as well called the Hibagon, which is found in the forests of northern Hiroshima. The Hibagon are said to be very quiet and timid and is known for running away from people, especially if those people are armed. I wonder why. Just like most of the other creatures that we've seen, they are reddish brown or black, sometimes with a patch of white fur on their chest, like a cute little tuxedo cat. It's said to smell awful, like a rotting dead body. Its face is more triangular and covered in bristly hair, and it has intelligent eyes. It's only about 5 feet tall. The first time it was seen was in the early 1970s by a group of elementary school children, and later that same year in July, it was seen again by a truck driver who described a gorilla-like creature on 2 legs that ran across the road into the forest. And a couple weeks later, on July 23rd, a farmer reported seeing a creature about as tall as a man, covered in black fur that emerged from the brush and stared at him with piercing and intelligent eyes. Another person around the same time reported it seeing walking through a rice paddy. So the area where these sightings are continuously happening is in the county that is now known as Saijo Shibaro. And they set up a department just to investigate this and patrol the area. And the police made plaster castings of what they believed to be tracks from the Hibagon at a construction site. In 1972, Kobe University also investigated this, but they didn't come to any conclusions, even though sightings reached a peak in 1974, with at least 4 reported sightings that summer. The last reported sighting before everything pretty much stopped abruptly was in 1982 when someone reported a 6-foot-tall creature holding a stone axe. There's also the Barmanu, which means big hairy one, from western Pakistan. The interesting thing about this one is that it's described really similar to the Minnesota Iceman. So in the 1990s, there were people who were investigating reports of this bipedal humanoid. And they later told reporters that eyewitnesses shown pictures of a selection of human and human-like creatures consistently selected the image of a primitive man found preserved in ice some 20 years ago by a Belgian team. And even in 1995, Loren Coleman, an anthropologist, did a segment on Unsolved Mysteries about the Minnesota Iceman, and there were multiple Pakistanis who reached out to him saying that they had seen something just like that, and they knew where it was buried, and he just apparently never went to investigate it. But reports about the Barmanu say that they will sometimes come to a town and abduct women and attempt to mate with them. And when they are seen, they're usually wearing animal skins or pelts. There were a series of investigations done in the late 1980s and early 1990s that were inconclusive. Some of the investigators said that they heard interesting noises that could only be made by a primitive voice box, but no recordings were ever made and no evidence has ever been found. Making our way out of Asia, there's the woodwose in the UK. The woodwose has more of a human shape to its head instead of the more cone-like shape that the North American Bigfoot is said to have. It's said to have a flat, wide nose and a protruding brow ridge. It's about 6 to 8 feet tall with reddish-brown hair all over its body, although there are some reports of it being black or even stark white. The most significant encounter that I found was from a woman named Deborah Hatswell, she has like a whole podcast and YouTube channel that's called BBR Investigations, or Being Believed, Researched, and Investigations. Basically, she researches a bunch of like cryptid related stories, and this all started when she said she had her own encounter when she was 15 in 1982. So she was in Salford, Lancashire, England. And she and one of her friends had skipped school and were hanging out at Wheel Park, I think is how it's pronounced, but people in England pronounce things weird to us Americans, that I've become painfully aware of in New England, when I basically was bullied when I pronounced the R in Worcester, which anyone who's not familiar is spelled like it should be pronounced Worcester, but no, don't actually try to pronounce things phonetically in New England or England. So I'm going to say Wheel Park, but I have no idea. So she's at the park with her friends when this tall man-ape monster jumps out of the bushes. She understandably freaks out and then proceeds to shove her friend to the ground and run home. And she later said she felt really bad about pushing her friend down. And was happy that this creature didn't hurt her friend, and instead kind of just like Homer Simpson, like absorbed back into the trees. When she described this creature, she said that it was tall with very dark brown hair all over its body. She said that it had amber eyes and square teeth with a face kind of like a human. She said that it scared her, but thinking back on it, it didn't seem aggressive, more so just confused. And now that it's been some time, she feels kind of sad for it and feels like it's just misunderstood. And that it was so human-like, she thinks of it like a cousin or even a brother. When she started doing some research into the woodwose, other people started coming forward with their own stories, like a woman who called herself Brenda, who said that she was walking her dogs in the same park after dark and was smoking a cigarette when she saw a barefoot figure covered in hair staring at her through the trees. She described it kind of like a chimp, but more human-like and much taller, kind of like, as she said, quote, a caveman from the dinosaur days, describing almost like a Neanderthal with a wider nose. There are some stories of the woodwose in Ireland, but not very many, and some reports in Wales, although one article I read said that werewolf sightings are more common, and they believe the two of them to be conflated. To move off of Eurasia, let's go down to South America. So when I googled South American Bigfoot, a cryptid called the Mapinguari came up as a result, but when I looked into it a little bit more, it's more of like a giant sloth rather than a bipedal humanoid or even an ape-like creature. So I did a little bit more digging, and I did find an article about a South American Bigfoot that some of the indigenous people called various names like Sisamito, Itacayo, Sucara, Maracoxi, Bisho, and Huma. It seems like most of the indigenous stories of the Bigfoot come from the Mayans, who worshipped a monkey god, and I guess some stories kind of took on like an ape like Bigfoot, and then this influenced the Aztecs, who described humanoid creatures. In the 1520s, Antonio Pigafetta, who was with Ferdinand Magellan, as they were sort of like exploring the South American coastline, described indigenous people who were double the size of a normal person with a big old dick, apparently. So they described encountering a giant naked man on the shore who was singing and dancing and throwing dust on his head. And when they went onto the shore and communicated through gesture, and they noted that they only went up to his waist, and he was very well proportioned, right at their eye level. And the giant pointed to them and then pointed to the sky, which they believed to mean that he thought that they came from the sky. In the 1570s and 1590s, there were more reports of giants in the area, and then there was an additional report in the 1760s. Now, these are all giants, not humanoid creatures that we associate with the Bigfoot, but apparently Magellan called these people Patageo, and they nicknamed the land Patagonia, which they interpreted to mean land of the Bigfoot. And you know what they say about big feet, right? Big socks. Heading into Africa, specifically South Africa, we have the water bobojan, also called the fudu. So this is a giant ape-like cryptid, with the ape specifically being a baboon. In fact, water bobojan in Afrikaans means water baboon. There is, to my ultimate frustration, practically nothing written about the water bobojan. So it is a 6-foot-tall baboon-like animal that has reddish fur and powerful arms. The first sighting that I could find was in 1965, when it was seen by 2 boys. There's also a farmer at one point who said that he shot one. And according to an anonymous story submitted to the National Cryptid Society, there was a trucker in South Africa who encountered one night. He said he pulled over because nature called, and then he heard nature's call. I feel like I'm starting to get unhinged. So anyway, he hears a noise and a rustle in the grass, and he rushes back to his truck when something at least 7 feet tall slams into the side of his vehicle, and he said all he saw was black fur and white eyes. So the last one we're going to talk about is one of the more interesting ones, in my opinion. It is the Yowie of Australia, mainly New South Wales, along the Gold Coast of Queensland. So a creature that can be described as a Bigfoot in Australia have been part of Aboriginal stories and folktales for time immemorial. It's also sometimes called the Yahoo, which some people have speculated is from the Aboriginal word meaning devil or evil spirit, but one source I read said that it might just be because of the book Gulliver's Travels that has a group called the Yahoos. There's also a Yahoo in North America as well, with some of the indigenous people here. So the Aboriginal legend says that they are 5 to 9 feet tall, with brown or reddish hair on their body, a red mouth, and talons on their hands, as well as fangs, which sounds terrifying. In 1912, a surveyor named Charles Harper reported encountering a huge and man-like animal that was beating its chest, that had large breasts on it, and its face was small but chinless and oddly human-like, with long canine teeth. He said it was covered in reddish-brown hair and was almost 6 feet tall, and sightings have been reported as of like a year ago of the Yowie. Stories about the Yowie typically depicted as quite aggressive, like it will rip the heads off of animals and destroy property. It's even been reported to attack humans as well, although that is relatively rare. There are a lot of theories about the Yowie because Australia is so unique. So most Bigfoot, big feet, I don't know what the proper term is for this. Is it Bigfoot? Is it like sheep where it's just a plural word either way, or should we use like foot and feet for it? Should be Bigfoots? I don't know. So most big feet are believed to be descended from an ancient ape-like species called Gigantopithecus blacki, but they weren't found in prehistoric Australia. From what I've researched, and I'm not a scientist or biologist, so don't quote me on it, especially considering my Australian zoological knowledge begins and ends with the Irwin family, there are no native primates in the Australian fossil records, at least of that size. Some other theories is that they are Homo erectus, a primitive ancient proto-man. And some people think that the Yowie could be some kind of bipedal marsupial that just hasn't been discovered, kind of like a kangaroo. The Australian Yowie seems to be popular like the North American Sasquatch. There are toys and Yowie chocolates. There is a Yowie statue in Queensland and a Yowie tour that you can take in Byron Bay that I would like to go on immediately. And that is where we are going to leave it today because I have no more to tell you. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, please consider subscribing or leaving a review or joining my Patreon. And remember, friends, history may be watching you, so don't fuck it up. And be careful of the woods. Bye!